So thank you all for being here with us today for this judgment-free space to explore pressing topics within the future of work and workplace DEIB. And PowerToFly is super excited to welcome our amazing partners, Plum and Pilot, and their CEOs to join PowerToFly CEO Milena Berry for this special conversation on retaining talent and employee engagement. So I have some questions for our panelists, but we really also want to hear from all of you. So if you have a question for Milena, Caitlin, and Ben, start thinking of those now or pop them in the chat. And on this next slide, I think it just kind of sums up that these are three great companies that are really working together. PowerToFly connects talent to companies that are committed to creating inclusive environments where diverse professionals can thrive. And backed by IO Psychology, Plum empowers organizations to quantify job fit, improve quality of hire, and identify leadership potential through personalized career insights. And Pilot is a 6-month emerging leader development program that offers HR leaders a simple way to boost productivity, morale, and engagement. Of course, you'll hear much more from those leaders in just a second. On this next slide, we just sum up a little bit of what today's conversation is going to be about. Again, we're going to set the tone with some facts and then hear from our CEOs. And then, of course, want to hear from all of you. Then we've got a quick poll for you all. And before I lead into those facts, this next slide just has some best practices to make sure that we have an amazing conversation. So I know we all know what those are. So without further ado, I wanted to kind of share some information to really help frame the conversation before we hear from our amazing leaders. And that's diving into PowerToFly's What Diverse Talent Wants in 2024 survey. So Martina, if you want to jump to that slide, we can show you some of the info we had. So we surveyed over 600 diverse professionals, 80% identified as women, a majority identified as non-white. And also what may be of interest to this group is 56% of the executives we spoke to plan to increase DEIB spending in 2024, and only 9% would decrease it. So that trend of investing in DEIB continues to grow. Now, on this next slide, you can see some of the findings we had in greater detail. So after dipping slightly in 2023, worker dissatisfaction and intent to leave is actually back up. This is crazy, a full 88% of diverse workers we heard from, both employed and non-employed, are actively job searching, with 83% of employed diverse talent considering quitting their current jobs in 2024 and not yet sure whether they'll reconsider that. So that's really significant. And this, in fact, this increase is an increase from 2023. That only saw 49% of workers considering quitting their jobs that year. So that means 34% more workers are considering a career change in 2024. And only 44% of underrepresented workers actually feel confident in their job security this year. And 1 in 5 were actually laid off in 2023. So that was far higher than the national average. And remember, we're really surveying a lot, very diverse professionals here. And that's actually even more telling when you look at the gender identities, because 60% of men feel confident. That's the same in 2023 in their job security, but just 43% of women feel job security, and 0% of trans and non-binary workers actually felt confident in their job security, which is all pretty amazing. Perhaps not as much progress, I guess, really has been made here since our 2023 survey, because 17% of respondents actually said that transphobia was an issue they wanted their companies to take a stronger look at. But despite all of these issues, one thing which really ties in today's conversation is that engagement levels for diverse talent are actually pretty high. So some 76% of our respondents reported being either somewhat or very engaged at work, and just 4% say they're very disengaged. Now, on this next slide, we're going to go a little deeper into some more details here. on why respondents would leave their jobs. Pay continues to be a really key issue. Dissatisfaction was up across a number of areas from our 2024 survey, and salary actually tops that list. A full 50% of respondents were either very or somewhat dissatisfied with their salaries this past year. However, there's a lot of other concerns as well, such as greater transparency, learning development opportunities, better titles, and the flexibility. Interesting things like, for example, more workers would prefer a fully flexible 40-hour schedule than a 4-day work week. I thought that was quite interesting. And 91% of respondents said they would leave their jobs if they found a job with greater flexibility. That's up from 72% last year. And now on this next slide, in terms of what respondents would like to see this year, well, they would love to see clearer career pathing and progression models, more leadership development opportunities, and more AI training and resources. These were all ranked above benefits like work-life balance and flexible scheduling, despite the fact our survey actually found a downward trend year over year in work-life balance satisfaction. In terms of skills that people would like to see, you can see this on the next slide. Of course, the hot topic that everyone's talking about, AI, that leads the case, but also people are really interested in project management, data analysis, and visualization, as well as, of course, those soft skills like public speaking and social and emotional intelligence as well. And so if you want to jump to slide 10, Martina, kind of want to sum up what all this means before we bring in our amazing speakers. Well, you can see that employee dissatisfaction has actually increased, and that's something we're definitely going to be talking about today. The impact of the pandemic and social movements on such points as flexibility, professional development, values fit, all that continues to be felt and is actually increased since 2023. But the good news is there continues to be many actions we can take to address these concerns. So with that, let's hear from some amazing leaders and bring in our panel. I want to just really quick introduce them all. We have Milena Berry, who is the visionary leader and co-founder of PowerToFly. Yay! A global platform connecting companies with diverse talent. Thank you for being here, Milena. Then we
Hi,
have,
everybody. Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
my pleasure.
We have Caitlin MacGregor. Caitlin is the co-founder and CEO of Plum, a leading talent assessment platform that helps companies make data-driven talent decisions. Caitlin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And last but certainly not least, we have Ben Brooks, who is the founder and CEO of Pilot, an award-winning emerging leader development program. Ben, thank you again for being here.
Glad to be here, Rob.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to take these slides down so we can see everybody's faces, and feel free to start thinking of your questions for our amazing panel. You can pop those in the chat. I'll get to as many as we can. But first up, I just kind of want to throw this out to all three of you and whoever wants to kind of take this first. But upon hearing some of those survey results that I just shared with everyone, are there any initial reactions that you're taking away from that? Any surprises, anything like that that jumps out? So whoever wants to take that one first.
Well, I'll be honest and say that I was really surprised at the percentage of employees of diverse talent that are actually thinking of leaving their jobs. 88% is a staggering number. That's nearly everybody, right? It's not 1 in 2, it's not 1 in 3, it's nearly everybody. So I think this is a really good wake-up call to anybody in a people function or in a leadership position to really think about, how and who matters for you to retain in your organization, and to really double down on engaging them so they stay. Right. So that was my kind of shock when I first saw the stats. I definitely was surprised by that number.
I did definitely think it is quite of a shocking number. And Caitlin or Ben, anything that jumped out for you?
I'll just add, I think there's a lot of media narrative around DEI getting slashed. And obviously your research showed something different, right? Only 9% of organizations were going to decrease. And I think 56 or 54% we're maintaining or increasing. That's what we're hearing in the market as well. If you look at what economists are saying, I got to hear the chief economist from PNC Bank and EY speak last fall, and they looked and they said, for the next 30 years, we're going to have a constrained labor market in North America and globally. There will literally be more work than there will be people to do it, despite AI and all these things coming out. And so, it is one of these things that the battle to keep and retain people is going to be key. And, DEI moving from sort of this nice or moralistic thing to actually being a competitive advantage is going to be so key, because we're going to need to be employers of choice where people feel welcomed, safe, included. That stat that trans people, 0% in your survey felt secure at work breaks my heart as an LGBTQ person myself, and we're an LGBTQ owned business. And so I think that a part of this, there's a strong sort of moral and ethical cause, but there's also a competitive cause, because our organizations have to be getting more than our fair share of great talent and keeping the talent. And I often think, and I put in the comments, compensation can be a bit of a red herring. People will eventually get fed up enough. They'll say, well, if it's going to suck, I'll at least get paid a little bit more across the street, rather than addressing sort of the root cause. Compensation is sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back, but it's really typically not the motivator if people are making a living wage.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more with what my colleague said. I think what's interesting is that we are hearing often in the media that, there is this power balance that's gone back to the employer, and there is a lot of, we need to cut costs. And it's really interesting to recognize that hasn't deterred people from saying, I don't like the way I'm being treated. It's not good enough, and I will go somewhere else. And, a lot of companies have reduced the amount of hiring that they're doing right now. Well, they're going to end up in a big problem if they can't also retain the people that they currently have. So I don't think it's being talked about enough. I think you're hearing a lot about budgets being cut, especially in DE&I. And I think that this really shows a reality of how people are feeling and what the priorities really should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to paraphrase PowerToFly's other co-founder from an article she wrote a few years ago, it takes a lot more than ping pong tables to retain employees. So let's dive more into that. And this next question is for Caitlin and Ben. So whoever wants to take this first, what are some common challenges that companies face when it comes to retaining top talent, and how can some of these challenges be addressed? Caitlin, if you want to take that one first.
I think the biggest thing is that a lot of times when we talk about talent acquisition and when we talk about, top talent, it's often seen, especially right now, being, companies are talking about trying to become a skills-based organization. It's, who are going to be my strongest software developers, and that have come from the highest schools and have, graduated. I just came from a campus recruitment event yesterday where they were talking about GPA cutoffs, and there's a lot about these qualifications and these hard lines to bring people in. But I don't think people recognize that when you think about the people that are your top performers, and when you think about the people that you're going to promote, when you talk about what is a top performer, you often hear things like, oh, well, they were really hardworking, they were great at solving problems, they worked well with teams. So I think there's a disconnect between what it is that we actually want people to do on a regular basis, which are often how they're showing up and leaning in and those transferable soft skills, and yet how we're selecting talent. And there's a mismatch. We often are hiring, promoting, and letting people go based on their performance, which are that teamwork and that execution and that working well. But it's not translating with how we're actually hiring people. And I don't think that people are thinking about performance and retention enough at the front end. Are we hiring people that are aligned to the behaviors that they need to demonstrate? And that's where it's really, when you look at third-party research, people that get to utilize their strengths in their role are 322% more likely to outperform their peers and can stay 3 times longer in a role just by being aligned. If you're an out-of-the-box thinker and you're really innovative and you get put into a job where you get to think outside the box, you're going to be happy, fulfilled, engaged, you're going to perform better, you're going to stay longer. And I feel like there's sometimes a disconnect of thinking about retention right at the beginning, thinking about performance right at the beginning when we're selecting people into the job. And are we using the right criteria for quality of hire in the selection process.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that that's very astute there. And it's also kind of making me think, Ben, that what role remote work plays in all of this as well, because as we heard from going through the survey results, flexibility, which often comes with remote work, is something people are looking at, but it can be a double-edged sword there. So how has the rise of remote work impacted employee engagement and retention, and what strategies have you found to be effective in managing remote teams?
Yeah, Pilot was founded in 2015 as a remote first company, and people laugh like, oh, you're not going to have a culture. No one's going to want to work there. No one's going to collaborate. And now, it's the hot thing. But I think the challenge is employees love remote because there's personal benefits to them. And I get that, I'm a part of that. It changes how we have to work, how we manage, how we drive inclusion, how we, visibility, proximity bias. There's a lot of things that come up, how you expand your network, how you get problem solved, how you get involved in things, how you get feedback. So organizations really have not kept up with, everyone's focused on how many days a week on a hybrid schedule. Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it fixed days? That is focusing on the wrong things in a lot of ways. And so the number of remote jobs that are available as a percentage of open jobs in the country has fallen precipitously in the last 2 years. The Great Resignation, everyone's like, sure, we'll try remote. And now everyone's like, I don't know, it's hybrid. You better be within 60 miles of the headquarters. Changes the talent pool, a lot less inclusive, etc. People live in different geographies, have different socioeconomic backgrounds, cost backgrounds, access. Multi-generational families, there's a lot of considerations if you look holistically at people. But I think that remote is popular because the upside to employees, it's very effective. We have a very effective company. We're remote, but we can't manage it like we're an in-person company. We can't have people in meetings all day. We can't lack trust. We need to have people that are better writers. Writing is a huge component of remote work, but we don't, skills-based, as Caitlin said, think about that. And as you get bigger, how do you assess who is that top talent you need to retain? Plum, I know, has a great solution around that, but often organizations don't even know half their true hypos. They're hypos that, maybe don't look like or represent the typical model of success or leadership in an organization. But from an organizational network analysis perspective, they're highly impactful. They retain a lot of internal knowledge, et cetera. So, I think remote, said simply, where you work affects how you work. And we haven't really understood that either as employers or as employees. And employees love the upside of remote, but there's actually a higher bar. To be successful in remote work, you actually have to be better than working in an office.
Yeah, I think the writing and communication, I often find working for a fully remote company, I have to overwrite, I have to over communicate, because I'm also responding to people who English isn't always their first language too. So I have to be aware, am I using slang in my Slack messages and things like that, and really over communicating. So I think that is super valuable piece of advice. And also, Courtney was saying in the chat as well, as a neurodiverse woman with invisible disabilities, remote work is key to me to flourish. And I think that's a great point as well, especially taking into account those invisible disabilities that we might not always be thinking about. And kind of on that topic of diversity and inclusion, Milena, I'd love to throw this next question to you, which is, diversity and inclusion are increasingly important considerations for companies. Can you discuss the role of diversity and inclusion in talent acquisition and retention efforts, and share some of the best practices for creating a more inclusive workplace?
Yeah, so first of all, if you think a little bit even on the effect of diversity and inclusion on the retention of your employees that we kind of started this conversation with, and to quote numbers from that same survey that you're pulling numbers from, Rob, it's our annual survey. We've run it now at least 5 years in a row. It's really fascinating kind of annual survey of our community. And it said that 87% would leave their role to work with a more diverse and inclusive team. And 90% will leave their role if they can find a place with a greater sense of belonging, right? So that's how your inclusion practices in the workplace are actually really then triggering your talent acquisition changes. And if I have one best practice to share, it would be about thinking about it comprehensively. oftentimes when people think about how they can improve inclusion and diversity and equity and belonging in their companies, they think, I have to hire more diverse people. That's like the only thing that comes to their mind. And so that's just such a small part of the puzzle. There really is this flywheel effect between the best practices you do for better inclusion and then how that feeds into the talent attraction, talent acquisition space. Specifically on the inclusion piece, what we have seen work time and time again is education, whether that's self-paced or whether that's with classroom style virtual or in-person trainings, just making sure that everybody is aware of what transgender is. To give that example, you'd be shocked how few people actually understand well even the LGBTQI plus stands for from those letters, right? This is just, again, one simple example about how to be inclusive to that population. But then of course we need to undertake training on our own and be accountable for our own learning, but also for the company, we have to provide resources for our employees to find that and pay for subscriptions or whatever it is that we need to, right? So I think, and then the other best practice is like you couple this training mode and learning mode with discussion mode where you foster moments of connection. And so we recommend, all right, get access to a self-learning platform for L&D and then host 4 quarterly trainings, not trainings, but like discussion forums, conversations, where you actually come in a group and you talk about what you learn and et cetera, right? So I think it's just so important to think about it more holistically.
Yeah, I think that's all great points. And I love what we do here at sort of our org calls, because of course companies can be American centric. So I love, okay, when it's Women History Month, let's learn about a woman leader in India or in Eastern Europe or outside of the US, because I think it's great. It's like really bringing us all together in that kind of learning space. So thank you so
I forgot one more point.
Yeah, please.
Sorry, which is like, yes, I do think this is all noise about the cut of DEI spend and the et cetera, right? Like everybody's cutting spend right now in every department. DEI, of course, is going to cut spend as well. I don't think it's disproportionately cutting spend compared to the rest of the P&Ls that people are cutting in these leaner times. But what I think is an interesting trend that's emerging as a result of it is a little bit of like the office of the chief diversity officer or head of DEI, whatever your role was called in your company, is might not come back. But again, the initiatives that office was driving are here to stay. And so then it becomes on us as functional leaders, the CTO, the chief revenue officer, the chief financial officer, all of us as leaders are driving these initiatives, need to be educated and need to be committed. And it becomes everybody's responsibility. And by the way, that's how these programs are going to be more impactful anyway. Not when you like give it to somebody who's kind of in a silo by the side with zero budget. Right?
Yeah, it starts at the top, right? So I think that totally makes sense. And you mentioned trends, Milena. That's definitely a word I think we've heard a few times already here. So Caitlin, love to kind of throw this back to you. So what do you see as the future of talent acquisition and employee engagement, and how can companies prepare for any upcoming trends?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how far out we're talking. To be honest, I saw in the chat talking about, the transformation that we are about to witness, I think is going to be unlike anything that we've experienced in our lifetime. I think that what we're seeing with AI is more than what we saw with the before internet and after internet. So I think there's a massive transformation that's coming, and I don't think people are necessarily wrapping their heads around what does that mean. I think right now we're hearing it as the market in terms of we want to do more with less, we want to automate and create efficiencies. But I think that that's going to have a big impact on, are we really aware of what we are measuring? Is there a real data-driven approach to this? For example, when we think about hard skills right now and companies trying to come up with a huge amount of keywords to tag the existing skill sets that exist of candidates as well as employees, it ends up being a jumble full of hard skills that exist right now. Like, do they know how to code in React? Well, the half-life of hard skills is only 2.5 years, which means that if somebody's really good in React, 2.5 years from now, it has 50% value. If anything, what we're seeing with AI is that we have needed people to learn how to code in a different language in order to build software. Now, with generative AI and no code or low code, I believe that the software developers you will be hiring, and it could be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, they probably only need English. And you're going to be hiring people that are really strong communicators. And the biggest skill that you're going to be looking for are people that are innovative and really strong in communication. We're already seeing it in finance, that people that have incredibly strong financial backgrounds and education, well, the ones that are harnessing generative AI in the workplace to come up with financial modeling, to come up with automated ways of repeating the repetitive tasks, are the people that are out of the box thinkers and very adaptive. And that those are helping them advance in their career faster than those that have that technical background knowledge. So are we, when we're planning for the future of work, really thinking about the fact that, yes, many jobs are going to be automated away, but there are 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs today. I can tell you, we're going to need a lot more cybersecurity people in the future as people get more and more sophisticated with being able to fool people and do a lot of things that are taking advantage of those. And so it's just really thinking about how are we measuring the talent we have today and future-proofing our organizations. And I can tell you, it's not the way that people are keyword matching hard skills today.
Yeah, I love all that. And because we were actually just looking at some other data that was coming out, and it said 90% of the global population will need new skills by 2030. So there's going to be a vast of reskilling that's happening. But anything, Milena, that you want to add to this question as well?
Yeah, I'm really passionate. I get really passionate when I think about the future of talent acquisition in particular, right? That's a little bit more in my purview than the employee engagement piece, which Caitlin's an expert on, and Ben as well. But so on the talent acquisition side, I really think AI and Gen AI is here to stay in the TA place. And I'm with you, Caitlin. I you know, whenever it was about whatever Web3 and metaverse and all these other, like, you know, new technologies, I was not the first one to jump on that wagon. But, you know, Gen AI is here to really, really transform every, you know, application space. But in particular for TA, it's very exciting because I think it will allow recruiters to have more time back for what they do the best, the human part, right? We have this saying in PowerToFly that we actually combine the bots with hearts, because we kind of have a combination of platform and services in most of our solutions and how we approach solving the problems of our customers. And that's kind of how, right, like the hearts are going to actually have a chance to breathe in the future, because the bot's going to do the repetitive tasks and creating, you know, for example, right? If I think a little bit about we just launched an AI recruiter, right? And usually it can take up to 4 hours to create a list of 100 diverse profiles with all the existing legacy talent acquisition tools. And our new AI recruiter tool generates this pipeline literally in seconds, right? So for all those people who are like, oh, there's lack of diversity pipeline, that's a myth that we're debunking with the help of Gen AI in our TA acquisition, you know, talent acquisition, HR tech applications. So I'll pause here, but I'm very excited about the future. You know, recruiting teams are already using it to concatenate notes, to explain why they like a candidate against the job, to do a lot of, and again, to compile lists. So I think, and do that, you know, automate outreach, pre-write messages that they reach out, pre-write messages that they tell to applicants why they were selected or not selected. I mean, that took a lot of time for everybody to write this separately, and Gen AI is empowering a transformation there, which is super exciting.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And Ben, this is making me think it's kind of going back to your comment before about the key writing skill. Anything that you want to add in here? Because I know you've been adding some stuff in the chat too around this subject.
Yeah, I just want to, I dive in the chat. I know different people learn differently on these things. I want to be inclusive just to make sure that we're connecting with people in different ways. I think part of what we're finding also from a DEI perspective, and some of the things that where we've seen slashed budgets, is when organizations were doing a lot of virtue signaling, right? Look good stuff that doesn't move the needle. there was a lot of guilt in 2020 and 2021 and employee pressure and market pressure to do something. But what it was a lot of commitments and a lot of money spent, and the results have not been good. We've made very little progress in a lot of ways in that period of time, unfortunately. So what we're seeing is there's an ROI focus, a performance focus in most companies that didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago across everything, not just HR, not just DEI or talent recruiting, engagement, assessment, anything. So part of it is this actually making a difference? And I think a part of what really makes a difference is being a well-run organization. You know, DEI, we don't often talk about standardization of work, but that's such an important thing around expectations being clear, having common ways of doing things that are understood, not having to sort of read, you know, these mystery signals from different managers and executives that do things super differently. That creates a very exclusive place that's hard to navigate, especially if you're first gen or from a different country or from a non-traditional background. Then it creates a really inequitable space because you actually have a steeper learning curve to perform and succeed in the environment. And so I think a lot of this is around fundamentally good operations and management creates more inclusive and more equitable workplaces, which then result in more representative diversity. But it's sort of the unsexy things about, you know, defining and standardizing what's expected, what good looks like, et cetera, which a lot of executives and managers aren't even good at. But when you do, it allows people from different walks of life to all come together and bring the best of their difference, bring the best of their unique perspectives, but figure out kind of the API to connect as humans in a standard and common way, which back to remote work, Rob, is a really important thing, is the standardization of work. So we don't notice the person at the desk next to us doing it differently or calibrating. It's very hard to see.
Yeah, and you're getting lots of +1s and claps in the chat. And I think it's going back to what we were just saying with Milena as well. It also kind of starts at the top as well, right? And luckily, that's a lot of the people I think who are on the line listening to us right now. So thank you all so much for being here and taking that first step. And I think the other thing that excites a lot of people who are on the line are case studies. We all love a good case study, right? So, Caitlin, love for you to share any success stories or case studies from your companies that highlight effective strategies for retaining top talent and fostering that kind of employee engagement that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think there's 2 that I'll quickly highlight. One is Scotiabank. So with their campus hires, they entirely removed resumes as a requirement. So they only used to hire finance and business graduates from the top 5 universities. And by eliminating resumes and having people apply with their Plum profile, they expanded to hire from 33 different colleges and universities. And what that did is increase their hiring of underrepresented minorities to 60%, but it doubled retention. So by screening in all these people they weren't looking at before, they had this huge impact on DE&I, but also by increasing DE&I, they also doubled retention. The other example is with Manulife. Very interesting to talk about upskilling and retaining existing employees. In that case, they had an old developer language, a piece of software that was being sunset. And so they no longer needed this old coding language that was no longer relevant. And so they created Manulife University to upskill into the new languages and the new business processes that were needed for the new future of their company. And instead of just opening up the reskilling to existing developers, they opened it to everybody in the company that could put their hand up saying they were interested in being upskilled. And people that were screened in by Plum that had a 70% or higher match to what they were going to be trained in stayed in the organization 3 times longer. So looking at, instead of constantly trying to find that talent outside the organization, being able to understand who is worth upskilling by predicting if they're going to be successful and aligned to those behaviors needed in the new job, and they're going to stay because they're fulfilled. Oh, we lost your sound.
Okay. Rob, do you want me to take over on the meantime, or Milena, do you want to take over?
Oh, am I back?
You're back.
Oh, great. Sorry, my fancy microphone once in a while, but it doesn't work. But no, I think those are all great points. And, you know, Ben was echoing it. Another thing we hear all the time here at PowerToFly on our events are the college degree and job posting. And attending many of our job fairs, I've heard many companies saying that's going away or slowly going away from many roles. And especially that's so key for the veterans community, especially we hear that at our Veterans Summit every single year. So thank you all so much, Caitlin. And Milena, love to throw it back to you there, which is, any advice that you would give to companies that are looking to improve their talent acquisition and retention efforts in general?
Yeah, so again, I want to remind us to think about it comprehensively. Don't just think about how do I hire more people, but at the same time, think through the whole, it's not even a funnel in my mind, it's kind of a flywheel effect, right? Between your addressable talent pool and how you show up there, then with the candidate leads, how you get them and how you show up there, with the applicants and how you treat the applicants and what's their experience now that you've hired somebody, what's their onboarding experience, and then as an employee, what's their learning and development experience, right? So and so think about it again as flywheel, and it's something that you have to make a plan. And then yes, perhaps you can't do it all at once, so you're going to say, I'm going to create a 3-year strategy. In my 3-year plan, I'll handle this first, but at least you're thinking about it comprehensively. Now, when it comes to kind of the beginning of the funnel, it's super important, right? Like in today's global marketplace, the power of doing employer branding by inclusive storytelling and kind of brand advocacy cannot be overstated, right? You really need to be very effective at sharing your commitment to DEIB. You can position your organization as a leader in that employer of choice that Ben talked about, right? Because you're fostering an inclusive workplace, thereby attracting top diverse talent and building a strong employer brand. And for that, of course, you need to invest, right? You need to invest in showing up in front of the community that you are under indexing on. Actually, it starts with even you knowing your numbers and what you need to do better at, of course, with demographic surveys. But then the next step is you're starting to really work on being seen as the employer of choice. And then the next step is you have to invest in actually generating these pipelines of underrepresented talent. That's the piece that it's most widely talked about. Most people struggle with it, but there's definitely solutions. And then again, once you get into the workplace, you have to really invest in training and development for an inclusive culture and in DEIB programs that are owned across the org and not just by kind of a separate office. So I just want to, and by the way, all of my last 3 suggestions started with the word invest, which I think is another thing I want to get across to all leadership, which is that it will take a little bit of investment and budget to carry out all of these improvements to how you show up and to how you then to the culture that you want to create. So put a number to it, and every year try to commit a little bit more.
Yeah, so much of what you're saying is reminding me, we just last month did our Empower Her Summit, and we had over 12,000 registrants for that. So that's building the pipeline. But for the folks that aren't actively hiring right there, then you're becoming that employer of choice, like you said, because you're getting in front of people, showing DEI, telling your DEIB story, as you said. Maybe you're not hiring this year, maybe you're not even hiring next year, but maybe 3 years from now you are, and you're still sticking in that person's memory. So it is that kind of long game that we often have to play. Sometimes we forget about that. And that, talking about the stories, Ben, kind of comes down to something I think you've mentioned a few different things about the culture and values as well. So can you tell us how can leaders create a culture that values and prioritizes employee engagement and retention?
Yeah, I'm going to give two suggestions. So first, last, I think it was Thursday or Friday, I had the pleasure, one of our customers, a water utility company, had a big merger and had a leadership summit that we spoke at. And I got to hear an amazing Stanford professor, Hedy Rao is his name. And I put his book in here, but it was all about removing friction. It was about less, not more. And so part of the culture that prioritizes engagement, they has in this book a bunch of examples. One of them is called, you create a ridiculous, all the crap that gets in employees' way of doing the right thing, and you work down the ridiculous. You figure out how to make it easier for employees to get safety equipment and to do their jobs properly, to be able to escalate, to take care of a customer. So a lot of this gets down to, do you set your employees up to succeed in their roles? if you've ever, been at someone at an airline counter, right? And how many keystrokes do they take and how, or a hotel front desk or at a call center, so often these people are not set up to succeed. And then they get the brunt of a lot of things, and that really impacts their engagement. But the other thing, and if you'd like, I'm happy to share these. I'll have my colleague Leighton, I think, is on here. You can put his email in the chat. But at Pilot, we have company values. This is internal. And part of employee engagement and retention, we've got values like thoughtfulness is one of our core company values. I'm happy to share our values and how we define all those if you want an object lesson. But it has us think about, hey, if we're going to roll out ChatGPT for Teams, we should explain to people what to use it for and what not, and to train them. Hey, if we're going to have an offsite, we should be really clear about things like accessibility, dress code. If someone has a bereavement issue, we should consider the flexibility they need and proactively offer to pick up some work for them. So that then gets rooted in the culture in a way that a policy never could. Because at the values level, you sort of empower people at any seat in the organization to sort of do the right thing. But what you have to define, people say culture. And if we asked even the four of us on the screen right now, what is culture? Well, we'd have 4 different answers. So you actually have to define specifically for your organization and context, maybe it's for-profit, nonprofit, government, et cetera. What do you value? And how are you going to make decisions? How are you going to recognize if you're going to invest, to Milena's point, what's the lens about how do you choose what you invest on? Okay, we're going to invest. Well, which thing? There's 1,000 things we could invest in. So, one of our other values is striving. And it's all about balancing pragmatism with ambition. We don't want to be perfectionists because that's toxic and employees can't succeed. And at the same time, we don't want to be static and stale where nothing ever improves and there's not a bar raising. So those become things that I, as a CEO, don't necessarily have to always do because everyone is doing it. So again, if you want, I'm happy to, I didn't think of this before, but if you'd like to see a copy of those, we can share that in a PDF. It's just that, but I think that's part of, you literally codify the culture in your values, your leadership charter, your principles, to have the employee's experience be built in. Because if it's just customer focus and market things and competitiveness and move fast and break crap and all this, it doesn't really sound like the employee is considered as a stakeholder. But when you think about the values and culture that you codify or the leadership principles, and they explicitly are focused on that employee, the employees know that they matter. And then you also know that there's a gap. If you have a manager or leader or other person who's not aligned, you can say, hey, the standard is this. And you know that standard. So what's getting in your way, or what is confusing about this, or how can we help you? Or are you not aligned to that standard because maybe this isn't the place for you? That's okay. Some people need to go. It's not like we're going to throw them out or fire them. It's a mutual conversation, but if it's not a fit, that's okay. But what you start to do is you don't have everyone, and employees, you get in a really bad spot where you do a referendum. It's like, what should our culture be? No. The executive team, the management team says, based on our industry, or based upon our founder, or based on our investors, or based upon whatever, here's who we want to be. And it has to be explicit. And you're going to repel people. But on the employment attraction and branding perspective and the storytelling that Milena's talking about, you're also going to attract people. And then you get more people that are on the same page, even if they're from different representative demographics, because you're explicit about who you are.
Yeah, please go ahead, Caitlin.
I think this goes really well into the next question, which is about culture anyway. So I think the great thing about where we are in 2024 is, one, culture is more important than ever because companies have just gone through 4 years of absolute turmoil. Every single year since 2020 has looked different. There's been different conflicting priorities, different, mandates from the top. And what we're hearing from our customers is that there's almost this fatigue of change. What we just talked about earlier, this is not the time to slow down. We are at the brink of a once in a lifetime thing that's about to happen, and companies are going to have to evolve their culture in order to be on the right side of this change and be able to get ahead competitively and not get left behind. And so culture is really the foundation of how are we going to ensure that we can usher in the transformation that's needed. And do you truly have the alignment from the leaders and the organization? And it starts with data. And what's great is that in 2024, with the evolution of software, is we can actually quantify what is the current state that we're starting from. What does the company really look like in 2024? Leadership may have said one thing, but how is it actually being demonstrated on a daily basis? What are you seeing being rewarded? What is actually happening from how those values are showing up on a day-to-day basis? We can quantify what it looks like today, and then quantify where the company and leadership is trying to go and evaluate that gap so that we can be very mindful as to what areas actually are great, we're doing a good job, and what areas need development, and how to tie that back into, we can also understand individuals and what naturally drives them and what drains them, and how to help usher in that change management from a very personalized route. And so the great thing is that we need data, and it's available now to really help with that culture change within organizations and create that environment to set people up. At Plum, our values are that when people flourish, business thrives. And so how are you ensuring that you're really setting up your people to flourish? And that's what's going to retain them. That's what's going to help you move them in this generational change that we are about to see over the next 5 years.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, both of you, it's just, you're getting so much love in the chat as well. I think people are feeling really energized, and making me think when we work with our partners and they have their pages on PowerToFly, we tell them, don't just put your benefits on there. That's good too, but we want lead with that culture, all the stuff that you're both of you saying. What is like that Bill of Rights kind of that you're starting off with there? So I love all of this. Definitely also taking the ridiculous. I'm going to be sharing that, thinking about that later, telling my own.
You got to credit Huggy Rao though. That's not me. That's Huggy Rao. And you got to get people to buy Huggy's book. I don't steal other people's IP. Okay, so that's Huggy.
Amazing.
Yes.
Yeah,
I wanted to double
please.
click on one thing Caitlin said, because I too notice it as a trend, which is that in the last 4 years, the speed of change in the workplace is just accelerating, right? And there's no sign of it slowing down anytime soon. And somehow that speed of change, it feels to me, has now exceeded the pace at which humans can adapt to change. And so that's why we're all feeling this discomfort and anxiety in the last 4 years, because like so much change, like, and we are evolving, we're an adaptable species, but it's a little bit slower than everything that's happening right now. And I think from a leadership perspective, what we can do is just keep reiterating that change is the new constant. Get on with it. Start, working on techniques to deal with that pace of change and to acclimate better to it. And that's really the new normal. And so I think that's really important to notice as how we are engaging our employees, that we are really subjecting them to a lot, like, and not just the market, the world, like the pandemic, everything that's happening in the world, right?
And on the point of change, I mean, if you remember early in the pandemic, how exhausted we were because everything was different. How we got groceries was different. How we were working was different. How we had to have masks on or do this. That was a ton of change. We had change fatigue. And, it's interesting. Oftentimes, politicians in elected office will campaign around change. And it's a change. It's a new day. It's hope. It's this, it's that, something. But then once they're elected, people resist the change that got them elected. And so the brain doesn't like, from a brain science perspective, the brain likes pattern recognition. It likes to know the if-then relationship so you can decide if something's going to kill you or not, because the brain's job is to keep us alive. So that's where change, in change management, Milena's point is so important. And Caitlin's point about the relentless pace of change, it's not going to slow down. So we have to have empathy and help sort of on the psychological and emotional part of change for people, and also make sure we're not having unnecessary change. Right, that we aren't focused or deliberate or set clear priorities. If you haven't felt pain, you probably haven't prioritized. And so I remember I heard once Carlos Ghosn, who's the former Nissan Renault executive who fled in the private jet and is in Lebanon. Interesting guy, but he said a long time ago, I was at a breakfast with him a long time ago, and he talked about, he's a CEO of a Japanese and French company at the time. He said, the Japanese hate change, but they love results. And he said, you know what? Everyone's a little Japanese. And so I think that that's a part of it, is we all want the result of the change. We want the more inclusive workplace. We want the digitization. We want the flexibility. We want the profit growth. We want the innovation. But the trade-offs that comes with and the discomfort that we have to deal with, is tremendous. And we don't typically offer a lot of support, including, by the way, to majority demographic people about how they're going to have to change up their swing, or they're going to, your cheese is going to get moved. And so that's a part of, readying these workplaces for the future. A lot of this isn't just in the sort of left brain strategy spreadsheet slide decks. It's in the emotive, right brain, whole brain thinking around how do we have people sort of be open to the fact that this is going to rock their world, and they're going to first be upset and pissed off about it before they reluctantly accept it, and on the change curve eventually appreciate it.
What's really interesting is when you take a very personalized approach to this, there are people that actually thrive in change, that they prefer it. In Plum, my second top talent is adaptation. So when I can switch gears and have to firefight new things on a regular basis, that keeps me engaged, that keeps me feeling like I'm doing a good job. I feel energized from it. Whereas when I am doing the same thing over and over and over again, I'm like, am I valuable? Am I needed? Like, it's all rinse and repeat. Do I really need to be here? Like, so there are people that really love adapting. There are people that love doing things differently. They are the people that you can put out front saying, hey, we need to do something different. Can you guys go and show us the results? Because then if that first batch of champions can show the business results, it makes it so much easier for those other people that are like, oh, I'm not sure. I was talking today, it's the simplest thing, but 2 years ago, when people that I'd reach out to saying, hey, would you like to book a meeting? We felt like it was necessary to offer times, to have 3 back and forths. It was more polite. It felt a little rude 2 years ago to be like, here's my calendar link, book a time. Now, are you kidding me? It feels rude to go back 3-4 times when I could have just sent them a link and they could book a time that is most convenient to them. So, 2 years ago, we weren't encouraging people to send a Calendly link, or Zoom now has it. You can send a link. Microsoft has it that you can now send a link. Everybody has kind of embedded the feature. Now we're trying to go to every employee and being like, have you set this up? Are you taking advantage? Because this will automate calendar booking. Nobody likes calendar booking. Nobody wants to do that. So everybody at the company is like, oh, great, let me get my link. This is exciting. This is going to make so much more efficiency. I don't have to do this administrative task anymore. But if it had been 2 years ago, everybody would have been resisting it. They would have been worried about the impact on customers. They would have been worried about, is this going to get in the way and cause friction? Now it's seen as a benefit, and it seems as reducing friction, and it seems as a courtesy. So it's about, how do you identify those people in your organization that can get out front, experiment, show everybody else that this is actually for good.
First, I've had that exact moral argument with myself over the Calendly link, so I get it. And I think this all goes back to what we were saying earlier in the conversation, which these are the things that we should be screening for, not just the hard skills, but that ability. Are you willing to change? Like, these are the questions we should be asking in the application, in the interview process. So thank you all. These were so many amazing things.
Can I give it one sentence? Can I give it one sentence?
Yes, go.
I remember when Hillary Clinton lost the election for president of the United States, her pastor said a very profound thing to her. He said to her, Hillary, when God closes one door, he opens another, but it's hell in the hallway. And that, I think, represents change for so many of us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that's very well said. But yeah. And by the time you leave this meeting or stop watching this recording, everything will have changed again, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's inevitable. Well, thank you all so much. Before we run out of time, I have a few more things that I want to make sure that we're sharing with everyone. And that's, first off, I just want everyone, we've heard so many amazing things today. So I want you all just to take a moment and think about, what is one thing that you're taking with you from the conversation? So if you want, you can put it in the chat, but otherwise, when we hang up or when you stop watching us, maybe you're walking the dog later today, you're just reminiscing, what's that one thing that I'm really going to hold with me, that I'm going to share with my colleagues, with my leaders, with my team? Feel free to share that there in the chat as well. And on this next slide, it kind of goes back to really saying what we've all been saying here, which is oh, never mind, we skipped that one. But really kind of wanted to say that so much is about developing, investing in an inclusive company-wide strategy. And of course, as we also said, the real work is just beginning. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So we just want to keep that in mind. And that's where the change comes in, right? It's not instantaneous, it's a long haul. But before we let you all go, I just want to run one quick poll from everyone that's here in watching us. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. Hopefully you can see it on your screen. Sometimes it takes a moment to pop up, but let's see. Can you all see the poll?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I just want to take a moment to answer those 4 questions there. And I'll just sit here in a moment.
Those are good questions, Rob.
Thank you. I'm gonna give it just another few seconds as people read them through. Most of you have gotten a chance to do it. And I'm just gonna, for the sake of time, I'm gonna go ahead and share those results just so we can all digest them quickly together. So the first question was, do you regularly measure the effects of employee engagement efforts and or survey your employees or gather feedback? Heard this, Caitlin was talking a lot about this. Glad to hear that 69% of you say yes, so that is great. Second question was, do you plan to increase your DEIB and or talent acquisition spend in 2024? These are a little mixed. Some said yes, some said no, and others said unsure. Third question was, do you offer mentorships, education stipends, virtual courses, and other professional development resources? Milena was talking a lot about this kind of training aspect, and happy to say that 84% of you also said yes. And last but not least, virtual, hybrid, and or flexible work has increased employee engagement, and good to see that 71% of you also said yes to that, kind of going back to Ben's point about the way that virtual work can be, you know, a struggle, but it can also really yield these amazing results. So thank you all so much for all of that. If you just want to jump to the next slide, yeah, it just kind of goes back to what we were saying, really all about developing and investing in an inclusive company-wide DEIB training, talent, and strategy. And really, again, to remind you all, the real work is just beginning. This is definitely not this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And attending events like this is definitely a step in that direction. And if you want to jump a couple of slides forward, Martina, you can also see, go back one. You can also just see the SHRM code for today's event. So if anyone's looking to get SHRM credit, take a screenshot right now so you can put that code in and get your credit for this event. If you don't catch it or need any help, feel free to reach out to us. But just also want to wrap up real quickly. Ben, I know we're almost out of time, but just send it over to you. Just tell us a little bit more about Pilot.
Yeah, so we put together a guide. It's totally free, but it's all about, not about our product or company, but it's about research to think about employee development. Really, a lot of DEI officers will say development is an equity play. If you want to level the playing field, it's hard to change the field, but you can level up the player. And so equity is a really important part of a DEI strategy. We often focus on representation and inclusion and other things. The equity piece typically gets missed. And so we put together a whole guide, a 10-part guide. But the only way you can get this is if you email my colleague Leighton. He's super nice, lovely guy. He's in Kentucky. He's super fun, everything else. But but if you just send him an email and just say guide, PowerToFly webinar, whatever, say, hey, Leighton, you're cool, anything, and he'll get you this guide. But again, it's a lot of third-party research. One of the things we know HR needs is data and stats. That's why the PowerToFly survey is so powerful and such a great resource. because then you can prove internally why this is important. And nothing better to scare your executives with than benchmarks or stats that have them feel they're competitively on their back foot. So check out that guide, and it's hopefully useful no matter what your development approach is, with some best practices.
Thank you so much, Ben. Everyone, email Layden and Caitlin. I know a lot of people are going to want to connect with you also after this event.
So we're giving everybody access to their own free Plum profile. So you can take a picture of this QR code, and it'll take you to a link where you can complete your own Plum profile. So it'll tell you what your top talents are. It'll tell you what drives you and gives you that natural sense of self-worth, and what drains you. And it really gives you a lot of tools to help you advocate for what makes you exceptional and what's going to help you outperform your peers and stay longer in a role. So hopefully that resource can help everybody really have their own personalized data and have insights into what that would be like to have the data with your colleagues. You can share with your colleagues, share your profiles back and forth. It'll really enhance the conversations and the insights you have about each other as well.
Thank you so much. And just to remind you here, PowerToFly is your solution for really all things attracting, higher, engaging talent. Anything that you want to add there, Milena?
No, again, I mean, I keep preaching comprehensive approach, and we've tried to build a series of software and services solutions that really kind of can deliver on that comprehensive need. So come to us. Our employer branding capabilities are amazing. Talent acquisition, diverse pipelines, that's also completely our bread and butter in very first value prop. And then finally, DEI trainings have been transformative for many of our customers. Happy to hear back from anybody who is interested to do more.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for your time today. Caitlin, Milena, Ben, thank you. And thank you everyone else who listened. And we'll see you soon on another event with PowerToFly or with PUM or with Pilot. So have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.